I still remember the exact second the air left the room. The courtroom was quiet enough to hear the judge's pen scratch across the paper. My father stood at the plaintiff's table in his best suit, the same one he wore to every important family event, and looked straight at me like I was some stranger who had wandered in off the street. "Your Honor," he said, voice calm and cold, "my daughter is just a grunt. She has no real understanding of these legal matters. She's been playing soldier for years. She doesn't belong in this conversation." Just a grunt. Those 3 words hit harder than any bullet I had ever trained for. I sat there in my civilian clothes, hands folded in my lap, heart slamming against my ribs so hard I was sure the entire room could hear it. No one knew who I really was. Not the judge, not the opposing counsel, not even my own mother sitting 2 rows behind me with tears already in her eyes. "My name is Captain Alina Vargas. I am a judge advocate in the United States Army. But that day, in that courtroom, I was just the disappointing daughter, who had chosen the military over the family business, the one who never came home for holidays, the one my father had written off years ago. I grew up in a house where respect was measured by how loud you could raise your voice at the dinner table and how well you followed my father's orders. He was a retired construction foreman who believed real work left calluses on your hands and dirt under your nails. When I told him I was enlisting after high school, he laughed. When I said I wanted to go to law school through the military, he stopped laughing and started shaking his head. "You're not lawyer material, Alina. You're a grunt. Accept it." For years, I let those words live rent-free in my head. I pushed harder because of them. I graduated top of my class at officer candidate school. I survived the intense training that turned soldiers into military attorneys. I prosecuted cases, defended soldiers, and stood in courtrooms far more intimidating than this one. Yet every time I came home on leave, my father still introduced me the same way. "This is my daughter. She's in the Army, you know, one of those grunts." I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I had built a life he could never understand, and that was enough. But sitting in that courtroom, watching him dismiss me in front of strangers, something inside me cracked open. The case was about the family property, the land my grandparents left behind, the land my father was trying to sell out from under my mother and me. He claimed I had no standing. He claimed I was too simple, too uneducated in real-world matters to have a say. What he didn't know was that I had been reviewing every document for weeks. What he didn't know was that I had already found the inconsistencies, the missing signatures, the quiet transfers that never should have happened. What he didn't know was that the woman he called a grunt had spent the last 6 years of her life mastering the very system he was trying to manipulate. But that day I stayed silent a little longer. I let the weight of his words settle over the room. I let him believe he had already won, because the truth I was about to drop would not just correct the record. It would rewrite everything he thought he knew about his daughter. And once I opened my mouth, there would be no going back. The betrayal didn't start in that courtroom. It had been building for years, quiet and steady. Like a crack in a foundation you only notice when the whole house starts to lean. After my younger brother died in a car accident 3 years earlier, something in my father hardened permanently. He had always preferred my brother, the son who stayed local, who took over the family contracting work, who never challenged the old man's worldview. When my brother was gone, the disappointment that used to be shared between us settled entirely on my shoulders. Every phone call became an interrogation. Why wasn't I home more? Why hadn't I settled down? Why did I keep choosing the Army over blood? I tried. God, I tried. I flew home for every holiday I could. I sent money when the property taxes got tight. I even offered to help review the estate papers after my brother's death. My father refused. "You don't understand business. Alina, stick to whatever it is you do over there." Then the letters started arriving. Official-looking envelopes from a lawyer I had never heard of. My father was petitioning to become the sole trustee of the remaining family land. My mother's name was being quietly removed from documents. My own claim as an heir was being challenged on the grounds that I had abandoned the family by joining the military. The language was careful, legal, and cruel. It painted me as someone who had walked away from responsibility, someone who couldn't be trusted with anything that mattered. I remember sitting alone in my small apartment near base, reading those papers at 2 a.m, the glow of the desk lamp the only light in the room. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from the cold realization that my own father was trying to erase me. I called him that night. His voice was calm, almost bored. "It's just paperwork, Alina. You're making this bigger than it is. You're a grunt. You don't understand how these things work." That word again, grunt. Hung up and stared at the wall for a long time. Something shifted inside me that night. The little girl who still wanted her father His approval finally stood up and walked out of the room. In her place was a woman who had spent years learning how the law actually works, how power hides in fine print, how silence can be a weapon, how the truth, when delivered at the right moment, can collapse an entire carefully built lie. I requested leave. I flew home. I hired no outside attorney because I didn't need one. I became my own. Every night I stayed up reviewing deeds, bank statements, old wills, and the quiet series of transfers my father had, orchestrated after my brother's death. The pattern was clear. He had been preparing for this for a long time, and he believed I was too simple, too distracted by playing soldier to ever catch him. The day of the hearing, I walked into that courtroom carrying nothing but a single folder and the quiet knowledge of who I really was. My father looked at me the way he always had, like I was still the teenage girl who didn't know her place. He smiled when the judge asked if I had counsel. He smiled when I said I would represent myself. He smiled when he called me a grunt in open court, certain the word would reduce me in the eyes of everyone present. What he didn't understand was that I had already decided the smiling would stop. When the judge finally turned to me and asked if I had anything to add, I stood up slowly. My legs felt steady. My voice did not shake. "Your Honor," I said. "My name is Captain Alina Vargas, Judge Advocate, United States Army. I have served as a military prosecutor and defense counsel for the past 6 years. I hold a Juris Doctor and am admitted to practice before military courts and, by reciprocity, in this state. The man who just called me a grunt is my father. And the documents he submitted to this court contain multiple material misrepresentations regarding the chain of title on the property in question. The silence that followed was absolute. I opened the folder and began. Page by page, I laid out the timeline. The missing notarizations, the transfers that occurred while my mother was recovering from surgery, and not of sound capacity to consent. The bank statements that showed funds moving in directions that contradicted my father's sworn affidavit. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The facts did the work. My father's face drained of color. The confident posture he had carried into the room slowly collapsed. For the first time in my life, he looked at me and saw someone he did not recognize. The judge listened without interruption. When I finished, she ordered an immediate freeze on any further transactions involving the property and scheduled a full evidentiary hearing. My father's petition was, for all practical purposes, dead on arrival. Outside the courtroom, my mother reached for my hand. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes was enough. My father left without speaking to either of us. I watched him walk away and felt something unexpected settle in my chest. Not triumph, not even anger, just a quiet, heavy peace. That night I sat alone in the hotel room and finally let myself cry. Not because I had won, but because the little girl, who had spent her whole life trying to earn a place at the table, finally understood she never needed one. She had built her own. I still serve. I still wear the uniform. And every once in a while, when a young soldier sits across from me and says their family doesn't understand the path they chose, I tell them the truth I learned in that courtroom. You do not owe anyone the small version of yourself just to make them comfortable. The people who call you just a grunt are often the ones most afraid of what you might become when you stop asking for their permission. I walked into that room as the daughter he dismissed. I walked out as the woman I had fought to become. And that, more than any court order, was the justice I had been searching for all along.